Hi everyone! Today I'll be showing you how to crochet Wishful the Unicorn Cupcake. No ordinary horse with a horn, this unicorn is a beacon of positivity ready to illuminate any birthday with the brilliance of a double rainbow. So Wishful can be made in sport, DK, or plush yarn by adjusting your hook size. Today I'll be crocheting with worsted weight yarn and a 4mm crochet hook. If you haven't already, be sure to snag the matching greeting card to make an adorable and one-of-a-kind gift that your friends and family will love. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's get started with the body and head of our cupcake. And before we start, let's review how to tie our magic ring with our brown yarn. Okay, so let's review how to tie a magic loop. So to start, we're going to get about 5 inches of our tail of our working yarn. And then we need to form a bit of a finger guns here with our left hand. And then we're going to lay that tail so that the tail part of it is down over the bottom digit of our left hand. And then we're going to take our thumb and pinch that tail so it's on securely to our index and our middle finger. Then we're going to take the working yarn, and that's the yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn, and we're going to wrap it around the back side of those 2 fingers really close to the top digit. So I'm just wrapping around the back. And then I'm going to continue by pulling it behind my thumb. So I just made a big loop around my fingers. Then we're going to wrap a second time, but this time we're going to go around the lower digit on the back side of our left hand. And then one last time we're going to push that working yarn behind our thumb on our left hand. Then when we've done that, we can take our crochet hook and we're going to flip our left hand over so we can see those 2 loops that we formed. And then taking our crochet hook underneath that top loop, we're going to use the hook to grab that bottom loop and pull it underneath the top loop. Then when we've done that, we're going to flip our hands back over away from our body. And then bring our hook and our left hand together. So you can see my fingers on my right hand are touching the back side of the hand with the loops on it. Then I'm going to take my right index finger and thumb, and I'm going to grab those loops that are on the back side of my hand. So the one on the hook and the one on my hand. Once I've got those pinched rather securely, I'm going to let go with my thumb and then slide all of those loops very carefully off of my hand. Once I've done that, you can see I have my tail. Again, that's not attached to the ball of yarn. And then my working yarn. I'm going to move my tail out of my way, kind of just swing it around clockwise to the 12 o'clock position. And then I'm going to grab my working yarn and begin tensioning it by laying it over my left index finger and then grabbing the remaining yarn with my pinky and my ring finger. Then we need to be able to tension our yarn, so we're going to have to let go with our right hand. But before we do, we need to make sure we're pinching the loop that we've tied and our tail together. So if you look, I like to kind of pinch so that it sandwiches that working yarn. So I'm just going to pinch both that loop and that tail together here. And then when I've done that, I can let go with my right hand, and pulling my index finger up lets me tighten that loop on my hook. Then to lock our magic loop or magic ring in place, we can yarn over and draw through the loop on our hook. And that locks everything in place. You can let go with your left hand. You can even stop tensioning if you want. This loop isn't going to go anywhere now that we've locked it in place. One last thing that I like to do before I get started is I'll take the tail. You can see it's sort of threaded through the loop that we've made. I like to take this tail and pull it out so that I can go ahead and get started placing single crochet inside. Before you begin, we also need to make sure we are working both in the loop and over the tail of the magic ring as well. Alright, so we are ready to make our first single crochet stitch. Alright, so now that we have reviewed how to tie our magic ring and we've got one tied, we're ready to start in on our first round of single crochet stitches. So for round 1, if you look up in the top left here, I've got the pattern along with what we're doing here on screen. We need to put 6 single crochet stitches inside of our magic ring. So remember, when we're working inside of our magic ring, we need to work in the ring and then also over that tail as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by making my first single crochet stitch. I'm going to take my hook, I'm going to go underneath both the magic ring and the tail itself. I'm going to wrap my hook around my yarn, so I'm yarning under. I'm going to draw that up, and then I'm going to yarn over and draw through both of those loops on my hook. Then I also like to tighten this stitch by scooting it over to the right a little bit. And then I also need to mark this stitch as well. So I'm going to take my stitch marker and slip it underneath both sides of that stitch and lock it in place. Okay, so that's the first single crochet stitch. We need to make 5 more for a total of 6. So again, we're going to go under both the tail and the ring of our magic ring, yarn under and draw up a loop, then yarn over and draw through both. And we're going to keep repeating that until we have 6 single crochet stitches total inside of our magic ring. You can double check how many stitches you have in your magic ring by turning your work on its side and looking at those little V's. They're sort of like little hearts that form. And you can count those V's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 1 too many stitches in my magic ring, so I'm going to take my hook out and pull that stitch out. Alright, so once you have all 6 stitches in your magic ring, we're going to do the magic ring part of it by taking that tail and pulling it. We will tighten that first round down, which gets us ready for round 2. So round 2, if you look up in the top left corner, we need to do 6 INC, and then behind that there's a parentheses that has the number 12 in that. So let's take it in the order that it appears. First, we need to make an increase. So an increase is when we put 2 single crochet stitches in the same place. So I took my stitch marker out from last round. We're going to be working in that stitch that we made, the very first one. I take my hook and slip it just like I did my stitch marker underneath both sides of that stitch, so both sides of the V. And then from here, that single crochet is the exact same that we did before. We're going to yarn under and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through both loops. We'll mark that stitch as well, as it is the first stitch of our round. And then to finish off our increase, we just need to place a single crochet stitch in that same stitch from last round. So the same hole that we went through, we'll go through again, yarn under and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2. Alright, so that 12 in parentheses is how many stitches we need to have when we finish this round. So we're increasing in each of the 6 stitches we made last round. If I have mathed correctly, that should be 12 stitches total at the end of the round. So let's continue making increases. I'm going to go through my next stitch, draw up a loop, draw through both, go through that same stitch again, and I'll just keep increasing in each stitch all the way around. Alright, that wraps up round 2 for me. And before I move on to round 3, I'm going to pull my magic ring tail tightly one last time. And then I like to trim mine short, leave like maybe ½ an inch on the back side of my work, because I find it gets in my way as I'm working around. Alright, so we're ready for round 3. And in round 3, we've got some more parentheses. So I'm going to take my stitch marker out. And the parentheses mean that we need to repeat everything that's inside of them in the order that they appear. And then outside, you can see it says times 6. So we're going to do that 6 times total. So that first stitch in there is 1 single crochet. So we took our marker out, we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the place where that marker was. And then of course put our marker back in. And then the next instruction inside of the parentheses says to make 1 increase. So we'll go in the next stitch and we'll put 2 single crochet stitches in that stitch. So that is everything inside of the parentheses once. We need to do everything inside of the parentheses another 5 times, so 5 repetitions until we're all the way around. So we'll go through the next stitch, make 1 single crochet stitch, go through the next stitch and make a single crochet increase, so that's 2 single crochet in the same stitch. That's our second repetition. I'm going to keep repeating that sequence until we're all the way around. Alright, that wraps up round 3. I'm ready for round 4, so I'll take my marker out. And then our next sequence that we need to repeat is 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, 1 single crochet in the next stitch after that first one, so that's 2 single crochet, and then an increase in the next stitch. So that sequence that we're repeating is 1 single crochet, 1 single crochet, increase, and we're going to repeat that another 5 times for a total of 6. Alright, that wraps up round 4 for me, so I'm ready to move on to round 5. So for round 5, we're going to begin by placing 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round. Then we're going to increase. And now we've got our next parentheses repetition pattern of 1 single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches, and then an increase in the stitch after. So that's 1 single crochet, 1 single crochet, 1 single crochet, and then an increase. And that's the first of 5 repetitions that we need to make. And that will take us all the way to the last 2 stitches of our round. So let's go ahead and do all of those repetitions. Alright, I'm at my last 2 stitches of the round, and I'm going to put 1 single crochet stitch in each. And that brings me to round 6. So for round 6, we've got a new type of stitch here. It's called a BLO, which means back loop only. So I'm going to take my stitch marker out. And then if you look at our stitches here, I'm also going to take my hook out so I can show you a little bit easier. We've been working through both sides of our stitch so far. So we've been going through and grabbing both of these loops while we're working. The loop that's closest to the front of our piece, that's the side that doesn't have our magic ring tail on it, that's called the front loop, FLO, and the one on the other side, closest to where the magic ring tail is, that is the BLO, the back loop only. So for this row, we're only going to be working in these loops here. So rather than taking our hook and slipping them underneath both, we're only going to be grabbing one. So to do our first back loop only single crochet, we're going to go through our next stitch, but just grab that back loop. So you kind of push your hook between the little V of the stitch. And then from here it's just like a regular single crochet. Yarn under and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2, and then mark the stitch that you've just made. The only difference between this and our regular single crochet stitches is we're going to be leaving the front loop behind. So the front loops of all of these stitches, we're going to kind of just hang out here on the surface of our work. So we're just going to put one single crochet stitch in every back loop all the way around this row. And as you work, you're going to notice the front loops are going to stay behind, which is good because we're going to come back and use these later on in the pattern. Alright, that wraps up round 6 for me. You can see all those front loops left behind on my work. I'm ready for round 7, where we got our next repetition pattern and a new stitch that we need to learn. So first, let's take it as it appears. We're going to start by placing one single crochet stitch in the next 13 stitches. And remember, we're back to regular single crochet, not back loop only, so go through both sides of your stitch. And of course, mark that first stitch of the round. Alright, so I've made my 13 single crochet stitches, and then next we have something called a DEC, or a decrease. So a decrease is when we're going to take 2 of the stitches from the previous round and single crochet them together so they're only one stitch. So to do that, we're going to take our hook and we're going to go through the next stitch in our round, yarn under and draw up a loop, and then we're going to do that exact same thing in the next stitch. So go through, yarn under and draw up a loop. And now that we've got those 2 stitches on our hook, we're going to yarn over and draw through all 3 loops left on our hook. So you can see it takes those 2 stitches from the previous round and puts only one V for both of them. Alright, so that's one repetition of the parentheses. We need to do that same thing again, so 13 single crochet and then a decrease. Alright, so I'm at my last 2 stitches. I'm ready to do another decrease. Let's review that one last time since it is new. So go through your next stitch, yarn under and draw up a loop, go through the next stitch, yarn under and draw up a loop, then yarn over and draw through all 3 loops on your hook. Alright, so that takes us to rounds 8 and 9, where all we need to do is put one single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. But before we start, I want to point out one last time the front and the back of our work, especially since we've got this front loop business going on down here at the bottom. So in Amigurumi and in crochet, there is a right side and a wrong side to your crochet piece. So the right side is the side that's been facing us, but potentially might have curled in like this on you. The right side is the side that has these neat, tidy X-shaped stitches, and then also does not have the magic ring tail on it. The wrong side has sort of these little lines that run through all of the stitches, and then our magic ring tail is going to be kind of hanging out there. So as you work, we want to encourage the right side to be facing out, so it should be sort of cupping in this direction, sort of like a little bowl so far. So as we continue working rounds 8 and 9, we want to make sure we're encouraging the right side to be facing out. Something to keep in mind as you go. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here on round 8. I will see you back here when I finish round 9. Alright, so I just wrapped round 9. I'm ready for round 10. So we're going to begin by placing one single crochet stitch in the next 13 stitches of the round. Alright, so there's my first 13 stitches, and then I'm going to increase in the next stitch. So remember, that's just putting 2 single crochet stitches in the same place. And then that's 1 repetition of that parentheses pattern, so let's do that a second time till we're all the way around. Alright, so I'm at my 13th single crochet, and I'm ready to do my increase, but we also have a color change coming up. So we're changing to white yarn to make the top part of the cupcake. So we need to do our increase a little differently than we've done in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and make that first single crochet just like normal in that last stitch. And then I'm going to start my second single crochet, which is the last part of my increase, by going through, yarning under and drawing up a loop. But then the last loop that I pull through this needs to be in our new color. So let's go over how to do a color change here on our piece. So first we're going to cut the brown yarn. I like to leave a little bit of a tail, 6 inches or so. That helps me weave that tail in too. And then we're going to grab our new color, which is white, and then we're going to leave a little tail on the white as well, so maybe 6 inches as well. And then to finish off this stitch, we're going to take that white, the new color, and loop it over our hook, and then draw that loop through. And if you look, that last stitch is really loose. You can see I can really easily slide my stitch around. We can tighten it down by pulling the brown tail and then by pulling the white tail. So find both of those tails and give them a pull to tighten everything down. And then as we work the next round, we're going to want to work these 2 tails in for the first 2 stitches or so. So if you look, our next row, we've got another sequence of another pattern that we need to repeat. So I'm going to take the stitch marker out, and I'm going to start by laying these 2 tails behind my first stitch. I'm just going to lay them behind there. Then I'll start tensioning that white yarn, and I'm ready to make my first single crochet stitch. So we need to make 4 single crochet stitches for our parentheses pattern here. So I'm going to go through that first stitch, and then just like we did with our magic ring tail, I'm going to lay those tails over my hook. So both the stitch and the tails are on top of my hook. And then I'm going to make my single crochet just like I normally would. I'm also going to mark that first stitch, even though it's pretty obvious that it's the first stitch since it's the new color. I'm going to mark it anyway. And then we need to make another single crochet stitch with these tails locked in behind it too. So we'll go through our next stitch, make sure those tails are laying over our hook too, yarn under and draw up a loop, then yarn over and draw through both. Alright, so from there our tails are woven in, we don't need to worry about them. I'm going to take them and lay them inside of my piece so they stay out of my way. Then I'm going to make the next 2 stitches, so 2 more single crochet stitches. And then an increase in the next stitch. And then I'm going to repeat that sequence 5 more times for 6 times total, all the way around. That wraps up round 11 for me. So for round 12, we're going to be working in those back loops again. So just like we did down here in the brown part of the cupcake, we're going to be working in the back loops only for this round. So I'm just going to put 1 single crochet stitch in every back loop only. Alright, I just finished round 12. I'm ready for round 13, where we've got another parentheses pattern to repeat. So we're going to put one single crochet stitch in the first 5 stitches of the round. And then we're going to increase in the next stitch. And then we're going to repeat that sequence another 5 times for a total of 6 all the way around. Alright, so that wraps up round 13 for me. So for rounds 14 through 17, all we need to do is put one single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. So I will catch you back here whenever I have finished round 17. Alright, so I have just wrapped up round 17 and I'm ready to start in on round 18. We're going to begin closing up the top of our cupcake here. So I'm going to start by placing one single crochet stitch in the next 5 stitches of the round. And then I'm going to decrease, and we've already done this, but I want to review because it's been a little while since we've made one. So we're going to go through the next stitch and draw up a loop, then go through the next stitch and draw up a loop, and then yarn over and draw through all 3 loops. So that's the first 5 single crochet and decrease. We need to repeat that sequence another 5 times for a total of 6 until we are all the way around the cupcake. Alright, so I'm ready for round 19, where I'm going to place one single crochet stitch in the next 4 stitches of the round. Then I'm going to decrease, and then repeat that sequence another 5 times for a total of 6 all the way around. For round 20, we're going to make one single crochet stitch in the first 3 stitches of the round. And then follow that with a decrease. And just like the last 2 rounds, we're going to repeat that sequence another 5 times for a total of 6 all the way around. Round 21, we're going to start by placing one single crochet stitch in the first 2 stitches of the round. And then decreasing. And you guessed it, we're going to repeat that sequence another 5 times for a total of 6 all the way around. Alright, so before we start in on round 22, at this point it might be a good idea to go ahead and add, if you're putting it in of course, the circle of plastic or cardboard here at the bottom of our cupcake. So I'm going to add mine. I'm going to pull this up long. However, this is a toy for a little kid and you are probably going to end up washing it. This may not be a good call. You may just leave this soft so it doesn't have any trouble being washed. So I just have these little scrap pieces of cardboard, and I take the cardboard and I trace the bottom of the cupcake, just go around with a pencil, and then cut this circle out so that it's the exact same size as the bottom of the cupcake. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to press it into the bottom of the cupcake, and then kind of make sure I fold that front loop that we left behind so that it's sitting evenly all the way around. Again, this is optional. You don't need to place this inside of your cupcake. It should hold its form pretty well, but if this is more of a decorational piece or something that you're giving to someone who's not going to be playing with it a ton, it's not a bad idea to help it keep its shape. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to round 22. I'm going to put my hook back in and draw that loop down back on it. So for round 22, we're going to put one single crochet stitch in the next stitch. And then a decrease in the stitch after. Just like the last couple of rounds, we're going to repeat that sequence until we are all the way around. Okay, so before we do round 23, which is our last decrease round, we need to stuff the inside of our cupcake. So I'm going to take my hook, and I'm going to pull that last stitch up really long so it doesn't come undone. And then as I'm stuffing, I'm going to keep this stitch and my working yarn to the outside of my body. Be careful about stuffing, because sometimes you'll stuff the tail on the active stitch inside while you're putting stuffing in, and then you have to kind of dig it out. So keep that in mind as you're putting stuffing in. So I'm going to start by taking a handful of stuffing and then pushing it down into the bottom part of the cupcake. If you've got that little piece of cardboard or plastic in the bottom part here, just push it so that it pushes the cardboard flat against the bottom of the cupcake. And then I'm going to take some of that stuff that I've already put inside, and I'm going to stretch it so that it goes to the insides of the white top of our cupcake. So it kind of has that shape to it. And then I'm going to add a little more stuffing to the inside of the top part here. I like to kind of push my fingers inside and then push that stuffing into the white parts of the cupcake to help give it more of a cupcake shape. All right, and I've got just a little more stuffing to add here. Alright, that looks pretty good, so let's go ahead and take our hook and reinsert it into that loop we drew up long, and then pull our working yarn down. And then our last round, round 23, we're just going to decrease in every stitch all the way around. Alright, so that's my last decrease, so we are ready to fasten off. So to do that, we're going to take our marker out, and then we need to slip stitch to the stitch that our marker was just in. So to do that, I'm going to take my hook, I'm going to go through my stitch just like I would if it were a single crochet stitch, yarn under and draw through, and then I'm going to just keep pulling that loop through, and I'll pull it to the other loop on my hook. Alright, so now that we have slip stitched, we're going to go ahead and cut a tail, maybe 6 inches or so, of that white yarn that we've been working with. And then to fasten off all the way, we're going to pull that last loop long, and then just keep pulling it until the working yarn pulled itself through the loop. Then we're going to tighten that slip stitch down by pulling that tail until it ties a knot. Then we need to wrap up the cupcake by putting just a little more stuffing inside, maybe just a pinch or so. Alright, and then we are ready to close up this opening here at the top of our cupcake by taking that tail that we've cut and threading it through our tapestry needle. And then we're going to sew through the front loops only of the 6 remaining stitches left. So remember when we were working in the back loops where we grabbed just that back loop? Now we're only going to be working in the front loop by sewing just from the underside and then up through the space between the front and back loop. Then I rotate my piece and sew up through the next stitch. And then I'll just keep doing that until I have sewn through all 6 of the front loops. Alright, so once you've sewn through the front loops of those 6 stitches, you can pull this tail tight and it cinches those closed, sort of like the magic ring at the other side. And then to finish off, we'll tie a knot by laying our working yarn over the surface of our work. I make a little loop, and then sewing down where those stitches all come together into that fabric, and then up through that loop that we just looped over the surface of our work. And then by holding that loop close with our thumb, we can pull our tail until that loop cinches around and ties a knot. Then to get rid of the rest of this tail, we're going to weave it in by sewing really close to where we just tied that knot and into the body of our cupcake and then out through another spot. And then when you pull that tail tight, it pulls the knot we tied on the inside and then hides the tail inside of our work too. I like to weave this in a couple of times by just sewing through the body and coming out in a different spot, just to make sure it's extra secure. So once you've got it woven in, you can unthread your tapestry needle, and then we can trim this tail by pulling it tightly and cutting the tail. You can discard any excess tail, and that wraps up the cupcake. Alright, so next thing that we need to do is we need to add some stitches to the front loops left behind on the bottom of our cupcake. So to do that, we're going to take our hook and we're going to flip our cupcake upside down so that we're looking at it as if we're looking at the bottom of it. And then we're going to slip our hook from front to back underneath one of those front loops. It doesn't really matter where you slip stitch through or where you slip your hook through. Then we're going to grab a little bit of our brown yarn, the same color that we used to make our cupcake. And I lay it behind my hook and then wrap it once. And then by holding both the tail and the working yarn, I pull that loop through. And then we're ready to add slip stitches to each of the front loops left behind. So to do that, we're going to go through the next front loop, yarn under and draw up a loop, and then draw that loop through the loop on our hook. And then we're just going to keep slip stitching in every stitch all the way around the bottom of the cupcake. So I will catch you back here whenever I have reached the other side here, and I'll show you how we can close off and finish up this round. Alright, so I've slip stitched all the way around. So to close off, I'm going to slip stitch through where I fastened on. And then I'm ready to cut a tail. So I'll cut about 5 inches or so. Then pull that hook and loop through. And then I'm going to tie where I fastened on together with the tail that I just used. Just a square knot like you would if you were tying your shoe. And then I'm going to weave these 2 tails in. So I'll thread them both through my tapestry needle. So here's my first. And then I'm just going to sew it into the body of the cupcake. And then up through a random place. And repeat that with the other tail. Then once I'm done with that, I can take these two tails and pulling them tightly, snip them close to the fabric of the body of my work. And then if you have any that are kind of sticking out, you can just squeeze your cupcake to kind of send them back to the inside. All right, as you can see, that adds a nice clean edge to the bottom of our cupcake. Next up, let's add the frosting. All right, so we are going to add the frosting now to the cupcake, and we're going to be working in the loops left over from when we were working with the white. So we'll take our hook, and to get started, we're once again going to flip our cupcake over so that we're looking at the underside of it. And then we're going to push our hook through just like we did when we fastened on with the brown, through just any loop, doesn't really matter which. Then we'll grab our turquoise, I'm using kind of a mint color here, and we're going to fasten on exactly like we did when we fastened on with the brown. So just wrap our yarn around and then pull it through one of those loops left behind. Then we need to chain a stitch. So I'm going to chain one, and that's just to take my yarn and pull it through, just like a slip stitch sort of. And that chain one is actually our first single crochet stitch, and then I need to work this tail in as I go too, so I'm going to hold that behind all of the stitches that I'm going to work. But we need to put 3 single crochet stitches in each of these loops all the way around. So this chain that I've made counts as my first. I'm going to go through that exact same stitch, yarn under and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw up a loop. And that's my second single crochet. I'm going to do that one more time in this space. So yarn under and draw up a loop, and then yarn over, draw through both. And that's the first 3 single crochet in the first loop here. So I'm going to keep adding single crochet stitches. So I'm going to go through my next loop left behind. You have to dig a little bit sometimes to get your hook to go through. All right, so I've got my hook in the next loop. I'm just going to add 3 single crochet stitches. And I'm going to just keep adding 3 single crochet stitches to every loop on the body of the cupcake. As we add more 3 single crochet to each loop, you'll notice that the stitches that you've made sort of start to kind of like wave a little bit. They'll form like a ruffle, which is exactly what we want. So we're just going to keep adding 3 single crochet stitches to every loop. I will see you back here whenever I'm a little closer to adding the 3 single crochet stitches to the last loop. Alright, you can see I am almost all the way around. I just have 1 front loop left, so I'm going to go ahead and add my 3 single crochet stitches. And then to fasten off, I'm going to slip stitch to that same stitch that I fastened on to. And then I'm ready to weave these ends in. So I'll cut a tail. And I'm going to pull that last slip stitch through and then tighten down. And then I can weave in both this tail and the tail I have left over from when I fastened on, the same way I weaved in the tails from the bottom part of the cupcake. Right, and then I can pull both tails tight and cut. And that wraps up the cupcake's frosting. So let's get the eyes and the mouth embroidered next. Alright, so to get started on the embroidering, I went ahead and threaded my embroidery needle with some black embroidery floss, and I have my embroidery floss doubled. And I also have already tied a knot at the other end of my doubled embroidery floss. Then we're going to sew the face on, starting with the eyes. And it's going to be about 5 stitches, so 5 rounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, above where the frosting is. So I'm going to send my embroidery needle up into underneath where that icing ruffle is, and then into that 5th round above the icing. The reason I'm sending my needle in through this round is because I want to hide the knot that I tied with my embroidery floss, and the ruffle hides it pretty well. We'll trim this whenever we're all done so it's not hanging out. Alright, so to make the first eye, we're going to lay our doubled over floss over our work so that it makes that little loop shape of the eye. And it's going to go over about 1 stitch, so 1 round up and then 1 stitch over to the left. And I'm going to sew into that next stitch over and then up towards the top part of the eye. So really close to where the top part sits. And we're going to pull this stitch tight. And then since I sewed close to the top of the eye, it's not going to pull it flat. It'll keep that rounded shape. So then I'm going to send my floss back down through almost exactly where I came up, and then into the bottom corner of the eye. And then just pull. And that helps the eye keep that rounded shape. And then you can kind of pull the front half of that loop. And then to make the eyelash, we're going to sew kind of at an angle and then up into the round above where we've come up. And then we need to cinch that one down as well. So we're going to come up kind of next to the middle part of the eyelash. And then to keep that eyelash in place, we're going to do the same thing we did here with the loop of the eye. We'll just sew back down through where we came up. And that sort of wraps and then cinches that embroidered stitch down. And we're going to come up through where the other eye is going to go. So the eyes are 3 stitches apart. So I'm going to come up through this stitch over here. So that's 1, 2, 3. I'll come up through that stitch here. Alright, so we can repeat that same pattern on this side. So making the other eye the exact same way. Alright, so I'm ready to also add the mouth on here, and the mouth is going to be 1 row lower than the eyes and then centered in between. So I'm going to send my needle so that it's to this round just below the other eye. And that stitch that I'm sending is going to cinch the other eyelash on my unicorn's other eye. And then to sew the mouth, we'll again lay our yarn or our embroidery floss kind of in the shape that we want the mouth to be in. And our mouth's 1 stitch apart. And then we're going to cinch that shape down just like we did with the eyes. By sort of sewing around the bottom point of the smile. Once you've got the smile cinched, you can send your embroidery floss back down underneath the frosting that we've made. So you can see the smile is formed. And then we're going to tie a surface knot and weave in our embroidery floss. So just like we did when we closed up the top of the cupcake, lay your embroidery floss in a ring, and then we're going to sew into a little fabric of the cupcake and then up into that ring that we formed. And then pull that ring tight around our yarn. And then we can weave our embroidery floss in by sewing down close to where we tied our surface knot, and then up to a random spot in the cupcake's body, and then pull really tightly to bring that knot to the inside. Then we can cut our embroidery floss, and then also trim the tail from when we started our smile. And then let's also add our unicorn's rosy cheeks here as well. So to add the blush, you can use acrylic paint or colored pencils, or you can use the blush that you use on your face. I like to use blush, actual blush. So my advice on that as well is to get a little and add just a little to start with, because it's really easy to add more, but it's hard to take off extra. So I'm going to go ahead and put some dabs of blush here on my unicorn's face. And that wraps up our unicorn's face and rosy cheeks. So next up, let's make the horn. Alright, so let's make our unicorn's horn. So I'm going to be using this light yellow yarn, and I'm going to begin by tying a magic ring. Alright, now that I have my magic ring started, I'm ready to begin in on round 1. All I need to do is put 6 single crochet stitches inside of that magic ring. And remember, we got to work over the tail of our magic ring too. Alright, so once you've got your first 6 single crochet stitches inside of that magic ring, we're going to pull the tail. And we're ready for round 2, where we're just going to put 1 single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. Alright, that's round 2 done. I'm going to pull my magic ring tail one last time, and then trim it short. And I'm ready to start in on round 3, where we're going to begin a parentheses increase pattern. So we'll put 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, and then increase in the next stitch, and then we're going to repeat that pattern another 2 times for a total of 3. Alright, so now I'm ready to make rounds 4 through 6, where we just need to put 1 single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. So I will catch you back here whenever I've wrapped up round 6 and show you how to fasten off and attach the horn. Alright, so I have worked all the way around and wrapped up round 6, so I'm ready to fasten off. I'm going to take my stitch marker out and then slip stitch to the marker's stitch. And then I'm going to leave quite a long tail on the horn, maybe 8 inches or so, because I'm going to be using this to attach the horn to the unicorn's body. So I'm going to take my last slip stitch that I made and pull all the way through, and then pull the tail one last time to tighten that down. Then I'm going to add a little pinch of stuffing to the inside of the unicorn's horn. And then I'm going to take that tail that I cut and thread my tapestry needle. And then grab my unicorn cupcake that we've already made so far, and we're going to attach the horn so that it sits centered between the eyes and is close to the top of our work. So to sew the horn on, we're going to just grab a little fabric of the unicorn's body and then up through one of the loops of the last round that we made. And we're going to just keep going back and forth, grabbing some work from the body, grabbing a loop from that last round, until we've sewn 9 stitches all the way around the horn and attached it to the cupcake. Alright, I've got the horn attached all the way around, so I am ready to weave in this end. And to do that, I'm going to tie a surface knot with it. So loop that working yarn over the surface of the horn, grab a little fabric of the horn itself, and then sew up through that loop, which ties a knot. And then I'm going to weave this tail in by sewing down through a little of the horn and into the fabric of the cupcake. Which will take the knot we've tied and send it into the horn. And then we can pull that tail tight. And that wraps up the horn. So next, let's get the frosting hair and frosting curls made and then attached. Alright, so next up we're going to be making our frosting, and we're going to be making 2 of these. But before we start, let's review how to tie our slip knot. Alright, so let's review how to start with a slip knot and chains. So the way I like to tie my slip knots is I'm going to take my yarn and I'm going to take the tail part and about 5 inches or so of that tail part, and I'm going to fold it behind the working yarn. I also like to pinch my fingers inside of that loop. So I'll put my index in middle, or I can wrap my pinky and my really whatever fingers you want to wrap inside. So once you've crossed that behind and then you've made a little bit of a loop, we're going to fold that tail over and wedge it in between some of those fingers we have inside of the loop. Then when we've done that, our goal is to pull this strand through without pulling all of the tail through as well, because that's just going to tie a regular knot. We're going to use this loop we formed to sort of pinch the tail into a loop that we can tighten or loosen as we need. So to do that, I'm going to grab both the working yarn and that tail, and then I'm going to use my fingers to sort of pull that tail end through. And then by tightening both the working yarn and the tail, and then pulling that loop, I form a slip knot. Now the reason I like to tie them this way is because they tighten whenever you pull the tail, but they don't tighten whenever you pull the working yarn. So that way whenever you start tensioning, it's not going to pull your loop really tightly closed. And then when we weave this tail in, it secures that first stitch. It also allows us to tighten that stitch too, so if we add a lot of stitches to this slip knot that we've tied, we have the ability to tighten it after the fact. So let's practice that one last time, so we can just pull that slip knot out. And again, we're going to take about 5 inches or so of our tail, and we're going to wrap it behind our working yarn, and bring it and wedge it in between our fingers that are inside that loop we've made. And then by pulling that working yarn and that loop through, can tie our slip knot. Once we've got it tied, then we're ready to go ahead and begin chaining. So we can grab our crochet hook, put it inside of that slip knot we've tied, and then by tugging the tail, we can tighten it down on our hook. Then we're ready to start chaining however many stitches we need to chain for our pattern. So to chain, it's a lot like a slip stitch. We're just going to take our working yarn and yarn over and pull it straight through and up. And the goal when we chain is to make these loops all the same size. So try not to make them too tight, but also try not to pull them up too long or you'll have a really loose chain. Alright, that's how we'll start when we tie a slip knot and chain. Alright, so now that we've reviewed how to tie our slip knot, we're going to go ahead and begin by chaining 13 stitches. So remember, when we chain, we're just going to take our hook and pull it through the loop. And we don't count the one on our hook as a chain. So we have one chain formed. Let's make another 12. Alright, so once you've got your 12 chains formed, we're going to start in the second chain from our hook. So again, remember, we don't count the one on our hook. So here's our first, here's our second, and we're going to put a slip stitch in that. So we're just going to go through, yarn under and draw up a loop, and then draw through the loop left on our hook. Then we're going to keep slip stitching down this chain, so going through every chain that we've made and making a slip stitch. Alright, so here are my last 2 slip stitches. Now that I've slip stitched down this chain, I'm ready to fasten off. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to cut a medium tail. And then I'm going to pull both the tail left over from where I tied my slip knot and the tail that I just cut through that last stitch. I'll just pull them both through and then tighten them both. And that's one strand of our unicorn's hair. So we need to do this a second time and then we'll get them attached. Alright, I have both strands of my unicorn's hair done, so I'm ready to attach them to my unicorn. And we're going to be attaching them so they sort of wrap around the horn and kind of come to the front. So I'm going to kind of position them on how I'd like them to go. And then I'm going to use some straight pins to hold them in place. And then you can either sew these on by using the tails that we've cut, or you can use a little dab of hot glue to attach. I'm going to use some hot glue to attach mine because I find it's a little easier to get them to stay with hot glue. But before I even start, I'm going to weave these tails in. So I'm going to take the shorter of the two, the ones left over from my slip knot, and I'm going to sew them in to where I want the ends of my hair to stay. So I'm just going to sew straight down and then out through a random spot here on the unicorn. And you can see that pulls that tail so it stays in place. It kind of locks it in place. Then I'm going to use the longer tail on that same strand and do the exact same thing, weave it in. And I'll repeat on this strand, take that shorter tail. Once you've got those tails woven in, we can go ahead and give them a trim. And then with our hot glue, I'm going to do the outer one first, so I'm going to unpin that front. And then I'm just going to run a little bit of hot glue. And then repeat here on the other strand. And that wraps up the 2 strands of hair around our unicorn's horn. Let's make the curl next. Alright, so we're going to start again with that same pink colored yarn and a slip knot for our unicorn's hair curl. So go ahead and get yourself a slip knot tied. And then we're going to chain 13 stitches. Alright, and once you've got your 13 chain stitches, we're going to start in the second chain from our hook. Again, we don't count the one on our hook, so 1, 2, and we're going to place 2 single crochet, so an increase inside of that chain. And we're going to continue increasing in each stitch of this chain until we are all the way back to our slip knot. And as we continue to add increases, you're going to notice your chain will begin to curl. That's exactly what we want because this is a little curled strand of hair for our unicorn. Alright, so now that I've got my last single crochet stitch placed, I'm going to cut a medium tail. And then just like I did with the other strands of hair, I'm going to pull both that tail and the slipknot tail through my last stitch, and then just pull, and then tighten both of those, so the shorter and then the longer tail. Alright, so there's our unicorn's curl. Let's go ahead and get this attached as well. So grab your unicorn cupcake. And this one's going to sit just to the outside of those other 2 strands and kind of curl off to the right of the horn. So to attach this strand, we're going to sew, and starting with the slipknot tail, so the shorter of the 2 tails, we're going to weave this one in and use it to anchor the tail in place. So just sew down into the cupcake's body and up through a random spot, and pull kind of tight to cinch that top part of the curl in place. And then with the longer tail, the one that we cut when we finished our last single crochet stitch, we're going to thread that through our needle, and then we're going to just sew a couple of stitches to the top of the curl to kind of keep it in place here. I'm only sewing stitches to the top of the curl because the rest of the curl needs to stay kind of opposable so we can move it or style it. Alright, so once we've got that anchored in place, we're going to tie a surface knot with that pink tail. And then weave that knot in by sewing down into where we've anchored the pink strand of hair to the head, and then into the cupcake and out through a random place. Then we can cut both of those tails off. And that wraps up our unicorn cupcake hair. Next, let's make the ears and get them attached. Alright, so with some white yarn, let's make our unicorn's ears. So we're going to start by forming a magic ring. And then for round 1, we're going to put 6 single crochet stitches inside of the magic ring. Once you've got all 6 of your single crochet stitches, we're going to pull the tail to cinch our magic ring closed. Then for round 2, we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. Alright, so now that I've got those 6 single crochet, I'm going to give my magic ring tail a final pull, and then of course trim it short but not all the way off. Then for round 3, we're going to increase in every stitch all the way around. Alright, that's round 3, so for round 4, we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, and then decrease, and then we're going to repeat that sequence another 3 times for a total of 4 repetitions. So 1 single crochet, decrease. Then for round 5, we'll put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches. So here's the first. There's my second. And then we're going to decrease. Then we're going to do that one more time. So 1 single crochet, 1 single crochet, decrease. Alright, and that wraps up the ear, so we can take our stitch marker out and then slip stitch to the spot where it just was, and then cut a 6-inch or so tail. And then pull that last loop all the way through. And that wraps up one of the ears, so let's make one more and then get them attached to the cupcake. Alright, I have both of my ears done, so let's go ahead and get them attached. I'm going to start by threading my tapestry needle with the tail from one of my ears. And then I'm also going to flatten the ear, so squeeze it so that both sides come together. And we're going to attach it flat to the bottom and to the top of the head. So grab your unicorn cupcake, and our ears are going to go just to the outsides of the eye and then on either side of the hair. So I'm going to go ahead and get mine attached by sewing through a little of the fabric of the head underneath where the ear's going to go. And then I'll grab a little of the fabric of the ear, and I'm just going to keep whip stitching the ear in place. Alright, once you've sewn through all of the bottom of the ear, we can secure it in place by tying a surface knot. And then weave that tail in just like we've woven in all of our tails so far on this project. And cut. Alright, so that's the first ear attached. Let's repeat on the other side with the other ear. Alright, that is both ears attached, and that wraps up this pattern.